It's 2024. Kanye West, now legally known as Ye, is supposed to be finished. Brands have dropped him, record labels have walked away. His net worth collapsed by billions in a matter of weeks. Charities refused his donations. His name became radioactive. Think pieces flooded the internet, declaring him not just irrelevant but dangerous. Politicians called for his exclusion from culture. Corporations treated him like a liability no ledger could justify. By every measurable metric that modern cancel culture uses to declare someone dead, Kanye West was supposed to be gone. And then 118,000 people showed up. Not to protest him, not to shame him, not to make a point about society's forgiveness problem. They showed up to watch him perform, to scream his lyrics, to hold their phones in the air and document a moment they'd tell people about for years. So what does that actually tell us? About fame, about cancellation, about the strange, unpredictable loyalty that art creates between a creator and an audience? That's what we're getting into today. To understand how remarkable this moment is, you have to understand how high Kanye West once stood, and how deliberately, how spectacularly he seemed to dismantle it. At his peak, Kanye West wasn't just a musician. He was a cultural architect. He changed the sound of hip-hop multiple times across multiple decades. He redefined what a rap album could look like, could feel like, could mean. He launched a fashion empire that forced the luxury industry to take streetwear seriously. He built Yeezy into a billion-dollar brand through sheer force of aesthetic vision. Forbes put him on their covers. The Met Gala dressed around him. Nike fought to keep him. Adidas paid him to leave. He was, by nearly any measure, the most influential creative figure of his generation. And then came the collapse. Not a quiet decline, not a slow fade. A spectacular, public, painful implosion that played out across interviews, tweets, and red carpet moments that the internet immediately turned into memes, think pieces, and federal-level conversations. In late 2022, he wore a White Lives Matter shirt at Paris Fashion Week. He made a series of deeply anti-Semitic statements across multiple platforms, including a now infamous appearance on Alex Jones's show, where he said things so extreme that even Jones appeared visibly uncomfortable. The backlash was immediate and institutional. Adidas terminated its Yeezy partnership, costing him an estimated $1.5 billion. Gap ended their collaboration. Balenciaga severed ties. CAA dropped him. His talent agency, his record label partners, his corporate allies, gone. The industry sent a clear message. Kanye West is over. The fans apparently didn't get that message. Here's why this story is more than just celebrity gossip dressed in documentary clothing. The concept of cancellation. The idea that public figures can be permanently exiled from culture through collective rejection is one of the defining social phenomena of the last decade. It emerged as a tool of accountability, a way for ordinary people, particularly those who felt unheard by traditional institutions, to exert real economic and reputational pressure on people who cause harm. And by any definition, Kanye West's behavior in 2022 caused real, measurable harm. Jewish organizations documented a spike in anti-Semitic incidents in the weeks following his statements. Researchers traced direct connections between Ye's rhetoric and the language appearing in extremist online spaces. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't just defensive commentary. The consequences rippled into the real world with documented, measurable impact. And yet, 118,000 people. The reason this matters is because it forces a genuinely uncomfortable question. Does cancellation actually work? Or does it only work on people who never had that deep, irrational, emotionally anchored relationship with an audience? Because what Kanye has, what he built across 5, 6, 7 distinct eras of music, isn't just a fan base. It's a community of people who feel like his art helped them survive something, and that kind of connection doesn't dissolve cleanly because a press release says it should. Understanding why those 118,000 people showed up tells us something profound about the limits of institutional accountability and the enduring, stubborn, sometimes unsettling power of art. To understand the loyalty, you have to live inside the catalog for a moment. Kanye West released The College Dropout in 2004 at a time when hip-hop was still dominated by hardened street narratives and gangsta tropes. He walked in wearing a pink polo, rapping about working retail, about wanting to drop out, about his mother. He was mocked before the album dropped. Radio programmers didn't know what to do with him. And then the album went quadruple platinum. It won 3 Grammys. It fundamentally altered what the genre thought was possible. Late registration deepened that thesis and added orchestration. Graduation turned hip-hop into stadium music. N08's and Heartbreak, released after the death of his mother and the collapse of his engagement, was a raw, auto-tune-saturated grief journal that felt embarrassingly vulnerable by hip-hop standards at the time. Critics were uncertain. A generation of artists, Drake, Kid Cudi, Frank Ocean, Travis Scott, cited it as the record that changed their creative lives. Then came My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, an album so meticulous, so maximalist, so operatically ambitious that Rolling Stone called it the album of the decade. It was a controlled explosion of sound, ego, vulnerability, and scale. It was Kanye proving that genius and chaos could coexist on the same record. What made all of this meaningful to listeners wasn't just the craft, it was the confession embedded in the craft. Kanye rapped about his insecurities, his grief, his ambition, his failures, his arrogance, his fear, with a specificity that felt almost inappropriate, like reading someone's unsent letters. His listeners didn't just enjoy the music, they felt seen by it. That emotional contract, built over 20 years of extraordinary, sometimes bewildering, always ambitious output, doesn't simply terminate when a brand ends a partnership. And it's important to note, Kanye's downfall wasn't a single moment of poor judgment. It was a sustained pattern of escalating behavior played out in an era of social media immediacy, where every statement was amplified, dissected, and weaponized in real time. The mental health dimensions of his public breakdowns were visible and documented, and yet the public conversation rarely found a way to hold both things simultaneously, that someone can be genuinely harmful and genuinely unwell, and that neither of those facts erases the other. The industry took the cleaner path. Cut him off, move on. What the crowd at that concert proved is that the audience relationship operates on entirely different terms. When the concert was announced, the reaction was split and loud. On one side, outrage, boycott threats, open letters, accusations directed at the venue for platforming a figure who had caused documented harm. Jewish advocacy groups issued statements. Cultural commentators wrote columns about what the event's very existence said about the state of accountability in entertainment. On the other side, tickets sold within minutes. And not just to some fringe remnant of die-hard defenders. The demographics of that 118,000-person crowd told a different story. Young people who weren't fully formed during his early albums. People who had discovered him through the Yeezy sneaker line. People who grew up with Stronger on their childhood playlists and had never stopped associating it with a specific formative memory. People who came specifically because they refused to let any external institution decide what art they were allowed to experience. The sellout speed was the turning point. Because when a concert sells out despite organized boycotts, despite mainstream media coverage framing the event as controversial, despite corporations having already distanced themselves from the artist, that tells you something structural. That tells you the cancellation framework, as it currently exists, has a ceiling. And that ceiling appears when the artist in question has a catalog deep enough, emotionally significant enough, and generationally broad enough to sustain independent loyalty. Kanye crossed that threshold years ago. The 118,000 people in that arena were proof that the institutional verdict and the popular verdict had arrived at entirely different conclusions. What we're really grappling with here is one of the most complicated questions in modern culture. Can and should art be separated from the artist? It's not a new question. It has been asked about Picasso, about Wagner, about Michael Jackson, about R. Kelly. Each case arrives with its own moral weighting, its own category of harm, its own set of complications. And there is no clean universal answer, because the question itself resists simplicity. But the Kanye case introduces a variable that many of these historical examples don't fully account for: the internet era's illusion of control. The cancellation framework emerged in a social media age that created the feeling that collective pressure could function as a permanent lever of accountability, and for certain kinds of careers, in certain institutional contexts, it can. But for artists who have built something genuinely transcendent, who have created work that lives inside people in the way that Kanye's music lives inside a generation, the lever reaches its limit. Because those 118,000 people weren't endorsing his worldview. The evidence suggests most of them weren't. Exit interviews, social media posts, comment sections from attendees. The most common sentiment wasn't, "I agree with Kanye." It was, "I'm not letting anyone take this music away from me." That distinction matters enormously, and it's one that the cancel discourse frequently collapses. Consuming art is not the same as endorsing ideology. Showing up to a concert is not the same as issuing a moral approval, but it also isn't entirely separate from consequence, which is why the discomfort doesn't fully dissolve. What the 118,000 revealed is that we are living in a moment of profound cultural incoherence. The institutions, brands, labels, agencies have their accountability framework. The audience has its own. And those two frameworks operate on fundamentally different timelines, different logics, and different definitions of what constitutes a final verdict. Geopolitically, this also signals something about how Western cancel culture exports and fails to export simultaneously. In markets across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, Kanye remains an almost mythological figure. The backlash that felt terminal in American media barely registered. His music streams globally, continuously, without interruption. The cancellation was always more local than it felt. The long-term consequence of this moment is that it will embolden future artists. It will recalibrate how the industry thinks about the durability of talent relationships. And it will force a more honest conversation about what cancellation was ever actually designed to accomplish. Kanye West was supposed to be canceled. The institutions decided it. The brands confirmed it. The press declared it over and over until it felt like consensus. And then 118,000 people filled an arena, held their lights up in the dark, and screamed the words back at him. That's not a redemption story. Let's be careful not to frame it as one. The harm he caused was real, and no concert attendance figure erases that arithmetic. But it is a story about the limits of institutional power over emotional truth. About the strange, durable, sometimes maddening resilience of art that has genuinely meant something to people. The cancellation framework assumes the audience will follow the institutional lead. Kanye's fans reminded us that audiences have never in the entire history of culture worked that way. The industry cancels careers. The crowd decides legacies. And on that night, with 118,000 voices deciding all at once, the crowd spoke.